It's one of those odd and very Australian quirks that we tend to create our legends from ratbags and failures. Ned Kelly is a hero. Our greatest pride is the defeat at Gallipoli. And our most famous explorers are Burke and Wills. These two blokes failed dismally in their attempt to be the first Europeans to cross the country. But we admire them anyway because, hey, they gave it a damn good shake. To mark the 150th anniversary of that ill-fated expedition, I retraced their footsteps, taking along a famous actor, a historian, and a modern-day explorer for company. And what I discovered was a very different Robert O'Hara Burke from the one I learnt about at school. Paradise is not a word often applied to Australia's harsh inland, but it's the best word to describe Cooper's Creek today. In the wake of drought-breaking rains, it's a meandering, pulsating ribbon of life running from Queensland down into South Australia. It's almost impossible to conceive of it now as the barren wilderness graveyard in which our two most famous explorers, Burke and Wills, perished.
It's so beautiful.
It's just unbelievable that anyone would die in this Garden of Eden.
What they did.
I've come to the banks of Cooper with actor Jack Thompson and historian Dr. Jonathan King. Two men determined that Australia embraces the real story of Robert O'Hara Burke and William John Wills, setting the record straight 150 years after they set out to be the first Europeans to cross the country.
Well, Burke and Wills are household names because it was a tragedy.
Right.
John McDouall Stewart, hardly anyone's heard of him. And he was the first to cross the continent successfully 1 year later. It's like Gallipoli. Everybody remembers Gallipoli because we lost 8,709 men in a disastrous campaign, which we lost and had to retreat from. It's rather like Burke and Wills.
Retreat was the last thing on the minds of Burke and Wills in 1860. There was a continent to conquer, and they were the men to do it. Just as crucial, their financiers, the Royal Society of Victoria, were desperate to beat South Australia's man, John McDouall Stewart, to whatever prizes lay in the unknown inland.
It was a scramble for Central Australia, wasn't it?
Well, there was a big chunk of unclaimed land in the north, just under the Gulf, and everybody wanted to get it. And the Victorians thought, we'll grab it, and Burke is our man.
But if it's a race he wants, I'll give him one.
Did you like playing Burke?
I loved playing Burke.
I mean to cross this country, Mr.
It's hard to imagine anyone else playing Robert O'Hara Burke than the inimitable Jack Thompson.
And I mean to walk every step of the way with...
What did you learn from playing Burke?
Oh, I learned that he was a romantic, a man who was ambitious. He was also a stubborn and slightly cruel fool of a man.
The story of Burke and Wills is a heroic and tragic tale, but also a deeply personal one for Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson's not Jack Thompson. Out here, Jack Thompson's Robert O'Hara Burke. And that's what he is.
Trust us to learn the truth, they said.
There's also a strong family connection. Jack's father, the Australian poet John Thompson, is best known for his Burke and Wills poem, Into the Interior.
Their horses dying and their camels lost until the silences, the sand and the stone possessed them all and took them and absorbed them into the truth which they had dared to see.
Yes.
And so, on the 20th of August, 1860, with Burke as expedition leader and Wills as navigator, the explorers departed from Melbourne's Royal Park. Their aim to traverse the continent from south to north and discover what lay between.
It was an extraordinary event, and people went out to see them off, huge crowds to farewell this expedition of all expeditions. It was like Cape Canaveral. It was the blast off into outer space. So there was this wonderful sense of mystery, heading out into this great unknown.
This was an exciting new era of exploration. The Australian sun now rose over a very strange beast indeed. 26 camels were imported from India for the mission. Here was an animal designed for desert exploration, the Toyota of its time, capable of lumping nearly half its body weight and running on much less food and water than a horse.
This is the way to go. This is definitely the way to go. Anywhere in the inland of Australia, a team of pack camels is the best, in my view, form of transport, certainly from the point of view of finding out about what's going on the ground.
Andrew Harper is a modern explorer, a naturalist and a cameleer. As far as he's concerned, this beast of burden was exactly the right animal for Burke and Wills' expedition.
It was a radical new idea when Burke took off with camels.
Oh, totally. To import these exotic animals and head off into the interior, that was a huge thing in itself, let alone the actual objective of the expedition.
So the technology was right. What went wrong?
Look, I think it was rushed, the planning and the initial execution. Once they got over the Murray, they were on their own. You know, every decision they made could have been life-threatening, as indeed it turned out to be.
In hindsight, the expedition was doomed to failure, not least because of a series of errors of judgment made by Burke under a coolabah tree at Cooper's Creek, the famous dig tree, which they reached in November 1860, 12 weeks into the expedition.
This is one of the sacred sites for European history in Australia. It's the place from which they set out for the Gulf. It's the place to which they returned. And all of the heartache and the tragedy and the disappointment took place here at the dig tree. So it's of enormous symbolic significance for the Australian history.
Like generations of older Australians, I grew up with the legend of Burke and Wills and this, the dig tree. I remember it as yellowing pictures in high school history books. It's taken me more than half a lifetime to get to see the real thing, and strangely enough, it's much as I imagined, a piece of living history. But what has changed in the intervening period is the way we've come to regard Burke and Wills. Undoubtedly, they were brave men, but we have to face the fact they didn't have much of a clue.
I'll not sit here swatting flies while that little drunken ass of a Scotsman beats me to the Gulf. Cheer on, Mr. Bra.
Obsessed with beating McDowell Stewart, Burke unwisely decided not to wait for fresh supplies and cooler weather, leaving team member Willem Bray in charge of the Dig Tree base camp with instructions to wait 3 months. Burke and Wills, along with Charles Gray and John King, struck out for the Gulf.
We'll give them a show they'll never forget.
2,300-kilometre return journey, on foot, in the height of summer, on half rations. Amazingly, perhaps, they reached the Gulf in February 1861.
It's salt water, Mr. Wills. It is the sea.
But elation must have been tempered by the reality that now they had to make it back to the Cooper's Creek base camp.
And they were buggered, Jack, weren't they?
Look, they might as well have been on the moon.
Yeah, but they were buggered 4 months and 4 days, walking to the Gulf and back, on foot. They were absolutely exhausted.
What was the expression they used? Beat up.
Done for.
Done for.
Yeah.
They made it back to Cooper's Creek on April 21, only to find the camp abandoned and the word dig carved into a coolabah tree. Incredibly, the waiting party had pulled out only hours before, leaving behind some buried supplies.
Today. This morning. After 4 months. They left today.
Today, the carvings on the tree have all but faded away.
But as for dig wherever, it's not there, is it?
No, you can just see 65, which is the number of the camp.
Are we thinking of this as a site of a heroic tragedy or a dark comedy of errors?
Oh, in a way, it's much more a dark comedy of errors. I mean, when you know that it's only hours before that Bra's party moved on, it's bizarre rather than heroic, isn't it?
In the Victorian State Library lies an historical treasure trove, including Burke and Wills' last diary notes, where Burke records his grief at being abandoned and his fears that they were too exhausted to catch the retreating party. Instead, fatally, he decided to set out for an outstation at Mount Hopeless, more than 200 kilometres away.
Set out to walk across there. Keep walking. We'll go a long way before we get to Mount Hopeless.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Fancy deciding
That's right.
that you will go to a place called Mount Hopeless.
Look, mate, you know what we should do? We've run out of everything. You know what? Let's go for Mount Hopeless.
Yeah, that sounds good. Would Burke worry about us laughing at him?
Where is he? He bastard's here somewhere, mate.
But what really sealed the fate of Burke and Wills was their basic ignorance of bush skills and native tucker. It's now thought they poisoned themselves by eating flour they prepared from seeds of the local nardoo plant.
One of the many mistakes Burke made was not trusting the Yandrawunda people, because the Yandrawunda people were bringing fish in. They could see these white fellas were in trouble, and they were coming forward with the fish. Burke would grab his pistol and shoot over their heads. What a nutter you'd have to be to do that when you're dying of starvation and the blackfellas are trying to help you.
I'm afraid that you are shattering my childhood illusions here.
They need to be. We need to learn from history's mistakes or we'll make them again.
Only one man out of the party of 4 which made it to the Gulf lived to tell the story. The bodies of Burke and Wills were eventually retrieved and given a state funeral back in Melbourne, thousands of kilometres away from the lonely monument at Cooper's Creek, which marks a place where Robert O'Hara Burke died 150 years ago.
It's very moving.
Yeah, I can see that you're affected by it. Does that happen with a lot of your roles?
Oh, a bit. Not quite as much as Robert O'Hara. I've been to his house. I've looked at his life.
Yeah, you are, yeah. Well, that's of course because you're such a Burke-like character yourself.
And a romantic at heart. Yeah, I think that this is a beautiful place to die.
But we have miles to go before we sleep.
Showtime.
Mullets are back?
Unmasking the man behind the mullet.
Shame on you, Andre Agassi.
Tennis legend, Andre Agassi.
I've done a lot of personal therapy.
Game, set, match, Agassi.
An even greater champion.
It will affect millions of children's lives on a global basis.
Off the court.
Do you like yourself a bit more than yesterday?
Yeah, I do.
That's next on 60 Minutes.